말해. 나는 좀 이제 얘기다 대화 되바다 동아미 되바래 진짜 동아를 자고 오래서 다 동아 자고 봐서 아니 이게 동아 요야기다 근데 요새에 가와 요래서 디니에디 시역에 하고 어디 계치 뭐 자고로 와 디네 이제는 아주 동아 요새기다 아주 동아를 타고 봐서 동아 요새기 조어디다 요새 내디다 코와를 내봐이나 코베니 차산을 동아 용거랬어 디나에 얘기다 아주 내가 기비 중요한 남기된바 셰비 갑라 이니게당 안송래 타르시 문제고 봐 토야 돼 대토발랑 안송이 동안에 가서 안송 안줄에 타고 버렸어 제사당 안줄을 마타와지 안줄에 깨와 있나 가르가르 요래스디다 제사 안줄 써야지 저기 냐와이다 둔로 숨신에 숨샤네 제사다 예수기 니에디 예수가 니에사디 시에고 바디 예치 못 차고로 봐 제사 니 마셔봐이나 아주 델레 타야게 탑시 탑람 딩고 말에 지나다 디기 니세한테 디 니에들이야 동아 가르가르 여봐 강아 가르 여봐다 하고 보이나 어디가 지금 니에들레 타야게 탑람 딩아서 다된 아주 그라 고합이리 말에 디네자 나디 니에스팅 아주 그진네 데 만주기 니한테 마슈제 그진 디네마 다 냐와 녀위 고마 도시네 도시여로 와다.
Good evening. All of us wanting to experience happiness and be freed of suffering, having this as an underlying motivation leads us to want to eradicate suffering, gain freedom from suffering. And to do so, one has to understand the causes of suffering. And the cause of suffering, you could just put it down to, as long as one is bound in this prison of samsara, one suffers. Wherever one takes rebirth in these suffering realms, one suffers. And there is no suffering more intense than what is experienced by beings in the lower realms. So in order to bring about an end to the accumulation of causes that could potentially lead to our falling into the lower realms, we need to understand what is being experienced there right now, what is potentially awaiting us. And it's through understanding this that we'll develop the determined focus of mind to abandon the causes that would otherwise lead to rebirth in the lower realms.
사샤바이네 디파님베 또슈고네 파샤제 루시 메바스에 탑람 여바이다 디링이 탑람 제바이나 제와치마 마 나솔마 제모어제네 딘드텔라 기투야다 딘드게레 제바이나 딘드텔레 딘드게 아니 디기투야 안 딘데라야 소소랑게 지냐면 제바이나 아니 지게 탈베고 본토투야 디네 안sem제 탐지기도 사유고 본토되기 냠랭기 차상 림바지 딘드텔레 지투바이다 딘케바제 디네지 냠랭 기투바디 제고그래서 제네기 계획이 규定아주 제다든에 쌓고 그래서 제가 디네게 난 예위기 난 예와를 때나 강아딘데 델레다 타고도 제자데 델레 타에게 탑람디 디리에서 냠는 제야딩 아주 그 제가 제일 예위기 고시에네 내상한테 하고네 델레 타르게 삼바게 담바서 삼바게도 델레 탈페 탑람다 냐주 냠는 제야디 삼는나네 냠는 제고 도시 탑람디 냠는 제고 고래서 또 나닝보에 가서 냠는 제야기 셈슈 계획이 된다래야 델레마 계획에 탑람 제 배수 제약에 된다래야 내가 내수디 도시네 내산의 시고로 받았다.
Rebirth in the lower realms comes about independence on causes, and the cause in brief is non-virtue. Non-virtue accumulated, if ripening at the time of death, will lead to rebirth in the lower realms. This we need to understand because right now each of us has this rare and precious opportunity where we can actually change the trajectory of our future rebirths. We can develop ever greater certainty in attaining good rebirths by turning away from the causes that would otherwise lead to rebirth in the lower realms, and rather striving in the accumulation of causes that will lead to ongoing excellent rebirths. We are part of those fortunate few who have a rebirth where we can intentionally impact the lives that are still to be experienced. And with a wish then to gain freedom from rebirths in the lower realms, to give rise to a determination for freedom from rebirth in the lower realms, one has to have an understanding of what is being experienced and what potentially awaits us, so that one gives rise to determination. I want to gain liberation from at least the possibility of being reborn there. I want to bring a complete cessation to the possibility of being reborn there. Rather, I want to be focused on accumulating the causes that will lead to ongoing excellent rebirths, which means I can continue my spiritual journey, accumulating causes that will lead to my eventual liberation from cyclic existence and attainment of enlightenment, so that I can help guide other beings who also yearn for happiness, guide them to abandon the causes for rebirth in the lower realms, and guide them to attain liberation and enlightenment. So therefore, by understanding the situation in samsara in detail, including their situation in the lower realms, it leads to us to develop a determination to transform our life, to practice with a vigor and a determination to cultivate the causes that will lead to freedom from suffering. Last time we looked at the presentation on the hot hells and the neighboring hells. Now we come to the presentation on the cold hells. So in the handout, it's in the top of page 109, and in the published book, the middle of page 94. So we'll go through now the experiences of what is being experienced in the various cold hells.
Semjenyawa chimbo yegi ane teso basi tirari parana yejings deni basi sumti nidongo ona ne churujen yolas dene basi nidongi chebana shendu yodos anyawa tsangi ye nakasa changi ye sade yosa kan siyoresena 안되는 주기데 도시네 나데 야와 천이요서 그도 태소시네 그도 바지네 바세게 최비 되는 난 도시여래서 장가로 여다디 여사가와 여서 되는 시여래서 중도 다 여사다 니니 빠라래야 양을 넣어가래 시여래서다 이렇게 도시네.
The cold hells are situated outside the 8 great hells of sentient beings, each at a distance of 10,000 yojanas. 32,000 yojanas below here is blisters, followed by the other 7 cold hells, each separated by 2,000 yojanas from the one above. So this is a general layout of the locations of the cold hells.
안다딘마 정ge적으로 제라 예레사 단 추불제 세지 추불제니 세데 단 추불제 세데 근데 추불제 추도와 소탐바 기후 아추세와 세데니기 도시는 미로 딱도 지난 추불제 세지와 레스니와 다 장예는 추불제 세데 디 안에 다 추불제 세데 장예 기기 나네다 그래서 동화 총화로 최고래 제나다 추불제 세데 간디시에서는 학부 침보 답이 류탐제도 안에 류탐제도 가서 추불 중요하신도 kumbaose 지사다 학과 침보 자변도 수보를 봐도 신의 류들이야 포함도 근데 추불 먹고 되는 거라서 나 추불 먹고 되는데 가서 연나디 배 쿰바스베 차고 정무 차고 좀 차고 해서 주르전 세대 디네시 해서
There are 8 different cold hells, and they are in a sequence of a growing intensity of suffering. So it starts with the hell called blisters, then bursting blisters, then chattering teeth, crying, moaning, splitting apart like an utpala flower, splitting apart like a lotus, and great splitting apart like a lotus. So these then are the 8 cold hells, which are in a sequence of growing intensity of suffering. So to look at the first one, in blisters, you are hit by strong icy winds and shrink from the cold while blisters appear all over your body. As one then goes to the next, which is the second of these cold hells that are bursting blisters, there you'll see from the description the intensity of the cold and therefore suffering grows.
So tamtamba sidan chane be chane so tamtamba chane so patamya singura dinige so tamtamba said. And the gihu said in the chane be geja gihu sin geja so ba. Then the achu sin the geja so ba du sin yungore se ko su gida dinige tone mingru da sha.
And this process continues in terms of the intensity of the suffering with the next group of the next 3 cold hells, which the name describes the sounds being uttered there, chattering teeth, crying, and moaning. So in each of these, the suffering is growing in its intensity as the cold becomes ever more intense.
That is a mean that the sick to look like top of was that the nigger to one yonder couple of 60 in the issues and give you on the mean taba is mean that.
The name that is given to these 3 hells, chattering teeth, crying, and moaning, it's named after the sounds made by the beings suffering there.
Ubala said the part yain methodiki patamadu do skeru gorwa dina she asia hawa chimbu subul pata and subul segam subudi ngombora charge be jangmo che jangne subu ngombo cha de sega kiru sewa ngam dula so ba de sega ki go de jere.
The next, it's splitting apart like an utpala flower. As you are hit by strong icy winds, you turn blue in color and split apart into 5 or 6 pieces. So this is likened then to the utpala flower, which in that one is the color of blue color, and one breaks apart as if a flower has petals, but one's body bursts because of the intense cold.
Abe mother kebas one le because one bole de marble de then one chat that day that you pay mother kebas de anti 장모천에 캬비 온 직 마보차네 마보치데 카주엄 델레 마와 사와 개바고 세대지 델레 마인 세갈마서 망아 차고 그랬어.
With the growing intensity, the further growing intensity of cold, one gets to the next cold hell, where the color of the body once again changes, as well as the number of pieces the body splits into. And again, this marks the growing cold and the suffering experienced. In splitting apart like a lotus, you pass beyond blue and turn red, splitting apart into 10 or more pieces.
대단한 생물실 쉐도산 되네게 송나디마스 파바토메게 생물신알마 도 송요래 해지래 대단히 대단히 알레 오늘 베마들 개바스 샤도 베마들 개바스 베마들 사와니 개바니 빠빠 신도 마월 균이 카잠 델레 Marasalos. That Bema gave us and there Bema the Cherkeba, the Bema the Keba, one that Bema the Cherkeba dilemma, or that Jeza did Baba the Yama, the Dile, the Gisera that Galas over the Mama checking to ski or a set.
The final one, in great splitting apart like a lotus, your skin turns deep red and you split apart into 100 or even more pieces. So what you see here in these last three, there's ongoing progression of cold and therefore suffering as the being shows signs of the more intense cold and pain. Then Lama Tsongkhapa quotes the source for this presentation, which is, all this is explained in levels of yogic practice.
That Zeba and Chubur Jenny, Seriwa Masa. The woman Namni, Namki Sini, Namangama Nishu, and Gurdu, Sonso Osa. Magade, Chimagade Tilye, and Jangal Gijon. Gijule.
So then further description of these cold hells continues. Just to say here in our second line in English, I've made a couple of changes. As for lifespan, it is stated that if you were to fill a storage container up to the brim with 80 bushels of sesame seeds, as it is measured in Magadha, and take out one sesame seed every 100 years, the lifespan in the hell of blisters would last far longer than it takes for the sesame seeds to be completely exhausted. And the lifespan in each hell being below, for each hell below, is 20 times that of the previous one.
And I don't know this or Magade said penny that Yahagi such a Minchua, Delia, Dilyor, Dilmonkir, Denegi, Dilgi, and Jang, Dilgi, Jankal, Yeshua said, I don't know. Jangat Nuchi, then Dilusa, New, the big delusion, say just a Jorvada, Lucian, Nuchinala, then he Dilusha bigi, Dil Mazugi, Meal, Gathamba, Jodi, Dilji Pa, Lucian, Pa, Pu Dunja, to Pa, Mill, Lord Jerry, Jodi, Dil, that did Dildi, Chasan, Zoring, then you say Kaziyovina, me, Losero, Kaziyovina. Denegi Gilia and Nyawa Chuburjan said the Danshodigi, Nyawa Chuburjan, selling what Denishi, selling the said Denishi as I Sundua, Chuburjan.
To give an illustration of the great duration of the lifespan in the lightest of these cold hells, an illustration is given. So Magadha would have been an area in India where bushels of sesame seeds would have grown. So they perhaps had a major market for these. So they're saying, so it's 80 bushels of sesame seeds as is measured in Magadha. So this is perhaps something that was well known at the time. And then if one were to imagine the size of what that would be and removing just a single seed every 100 years, one could imagine how long it would take to empty that container of all the sesame seeds. And that's the length of the lifespan in the first hell, that of blisters.
Chubur change, ne chudo said the Nishuma, Tele Nishuma, Mama, Tia, Angele, Oma, Serin, Shagurmada.
As we see in the final part of this paragraph, the lifespan in each hell below is 20 times that of the previous one. So here what is being presented is that not only is the suffering more intense as one in the progressive cold hells, but the lifespan is longer. So not only does each being there suffer more, but they have to do so for an even longer, inconceivable span of time. From this then, one can understand that not only would one have to suffer for an incredibly long period of time, but that suffering would be unbearable for that entire period.
And then
the occasional hells. The occasional hells adorn the hot and cold hells. Levels of yogi practice says that they also exist in the lands of humans, and chapters on the Vinaya says that they exist near the shores of great lakes, as depicted in the story of Shankara. For beings born in these various hells, they all, because they are in similar environments, whether they're in a particular hot hell, a particular cold hell, or neighboring hell, or here an occasional hell, they share common karma. Hence, they are born in a particular realm, a particular realm of hell.
Nisewa se di soso rang le disu gabriel nisewa soso rang dunga nyoma janda le nyomo ya denigi kaise le nyongo ya kaise ni sumyo de denigi yesar wa de jisan dade bene nyewa chubuchen se de gesona deni semjen chasan dunga jikba diro nyongo chagora mangbolo wa dade nisewa se de kaise horong le mi jik ni le ya deni nyongo ya horong tumo ma yin bele le deni dunne dunga nyongo ya jiyon le ya jikba me ba de chesan ko nisewa si de ko kaise le yo ba de chasan le me ba me de si ko.
Just to correct that slightly. So I'll repeat with a correction the previous segment and then say the new part as well. So beings who are born in the hot hells, and the cold hells, and the neighboring hells, so in those three groups, those beings within each hell within those groups, they all share a common karma. Hence, they are born together in a particular cold hell or a particular hot hell or a particular neighboring hell. So they share some kind of common karma in a way that us human beings, or as beings here in this world, we share common karma. But the beings, it's slightly different for those in the occasional hells, where these are far more individual specific, and as opposed to being, maybe you could say, a group experience. These are more of an individual experience.
이게 제사단 지수 예호와지 가 요서가와 요레스네 deputy Nyawa Chanyada Janyagi, Nyeramdua Yores, using as a Chanyada Janya, Horny Horna, Tiny Wu would you Yores, and Dimaze and Nazi, a Miuna Yores, not Miulaya, and then Yahoti, Yahoti Yores, or Miuna Yubes, Yubi, say the negative, but seeing ocean and son Yores.
And the general location of the occasional hells is that they join the hot and cold hells, and they also exist in the lands of humans. And where in the human realm would one possibly find occasional hells? Well, as the Buddha taught in the chapters on the Vinaya, that they exist near shores of great lakes. As is depicted in the story of Shanktarakshita.
Deda samla jibar jade deda dang barna ugyua dile mebichiro chirti esa.
Lama Tsongkhapa continues. As explained below, it is very easy to create the causes of taking rebirth there. You accumulate many of them every day. And since those that you accumulated before are also innumerable, it is unwise to just sit around comfortably. You should think about them and be afraid, for nothing other than your precarious breathing separates you from them.
Lucia Ganga Dinit Tunga in the Yores, Delikiavana, near the Sola Kiavana, the Ganga Dinit in the Yores, Ma Dusuma, Yovaza, Dedana, and the Dene, Deda to give Guinness, and Desocarly Kini Kiwas, and Juda Kinlet in a Kiwo mother, you may ballet in a Kigo Marwa, Jesan Juda Kinlet in a Kigo, Jesan did I give you garrison, one ma, Jelma, and she is or that she is. Jezada Dondala developed in a Kigores, Donda you Migawashi ballet in a Kigori, one Masungor Surwa. Jezadinegi Migot Chebater, Shindu Junior, Sistanga de Migawa said, Diva said, Lela Udum Dush, Jing Lamsa, Diva Sacho, Yorba, Shindu Navares, Jen Nimeresia, Mango Solas, and the immediate Diva Mangusa go Wajera. And the deal was just a deal what do I give you this?
So looking at the first sentence from Lama Tsongkhapa here, as explained below, so this then refers to the following chapter, the chapter on karma. So as explained below, it is very easy to create the causes of taking rebirth there. So there we should understand to refer to the occasional hells as well as the cold hells, the neighboring hells, and the hot hells. So it's very easy to create the causes to be reborn in the hell realms. And Lama Tsongkhapa continues, you accumulate many of them every day. And the causes, in brief, are non-virtue. It is non-virtue that leads to rebirth in the lower realms.
that the deeper salto sabadi yang ji saya ke be du deeper saya de le la wo jung be lam jung ye wo shi wo re se di ro ba dang as be ne khong la ro sin lam sa ji test ma lam sa khong la ji yo ro ba an ji yu ro ji dan ji ni lam sa de le cha ba ya la ji chu chu ro cha go ro ba ji sa le la wo re se tu su tu ha ji sa de ne sa dang nga la sa jang sa ne nye ma ne dang ngo ko wa to ma nye ma ne sa she be je ba do be ma ji ge le yo ba ro ba so re de ne ki nga sa jang da dong ba dong me ba ye be nye ma sa she ba de je wu min cha wa mang wu min cha de min ma cha wa de ne je wu min yu la de ba de ne ge mang wu yo re so da nu ba sha she ba mang wu yo ro ba s ye be se de
When Lama Tsongkhapa says it is very easy to create the causes of taking rebirth in the lower realms, this is, we can recognize from our own experience, it doesn't take much for anger to arise. And it takes even less for attachment to arise. Our afflictions arise within us so easily. And when we're not aware, we act under their influence. And thereby we create the causes that, should they ripen into a propelling karma, can only lead to rebirth in the suffering lower realms. So therefore it is really not at all difficult for us to accrue non-virtuous karma, as Lama Tsongkhapa continues. And since those that you accumulated before are also immeasurable, so we have on our continuum the store of non-virtue from past lives, which we with such ease and regularity keep adding to.
Dibong kiru maje bache and really should have your money. So, just the nigger some time at Yawa, Tanya, Tanya, and then Yehovi, Yawa said, Nitsi, Yawa, you do not do in the gang some delegate, do not get some the how or that the nigger gay, divaside the lelo which charge your just not that Yama Mongo Sasha yore, Sabe yore, just that the name is a down to Carchi or Sen, Delema, Maki, Gay, you decide Lela Winza. 다들 아주 송돔 제고를 해서 송 뒤빠파 송주 수름 송과데 송파 송고고래서 제가 아니 제가 디송와는 알 디바디 사바기 말을 와서 그래 제가 송고고래 와서 제가다 마송아제 제 플레이션에 대하여 말했어요 단 데니기 단예마사 셰바 망부 요바자 니님부터 쉬고데 샤고래 해서 마샤바나 양직 다데 사바기 마 송바이네야 송되바이네 아마데 마샤바나 야 마오바다 아마디 민제고 민시마 데네키에서 동안 요시기레스 계시 데네자 아마디 님부터 쉬고네 샤고래서 제가 데네기 님보다 파수름 송야다 님부터 쉬고네 님부 님마 디바 지 마사바 마샤바제 두신 레레치 나오기고 돼요 말이에요 제가 데네자 데네기 되바이나 근데 가령 영화 요래서는 마오바다 데네기 다데 녀비기 녀들 마제체 동안 용거 영화 참 보여요 제가 다들 하는 소리야 탑람 요래 고급 요래 제가다 다들 하는 소리 마사야디 마야디 수림 덤제 덤심심제 수림 송와데 송와이나 데네기 디바티게 나 사바사게 말해서 녀마 사셔게 먹고 요래 이나들 님부터 쉬고네 샤바이나 데네 메바스도 그래서 제가 데네 사바이나 데네께와 치망 소리야 나서 데데 바키디 디동아디 강아디 경서 용고고 말해서 제가 데네자 데네기다 만족이 다들 야포 송돔제다 녀마디버 도주고네 마샤바죠 두신 흘려제 나와 계속 균에 삼마다죠 두신은 가지고 나와 기고체 되네 지 되어 있나 아니 가지고 데네기야 냐요레스 제가 강아체 냐요 데네자 다들 두신에 sab서지 데네기 내서 하고 엔자 데네 마오바네 데네 마제게 탑람 데려야 되고 송야다 아니 녀마체 샤톰제디 계침부시고래 해서 그러다
Lama Tsongkhapa continues, it is unwise to just sit around comfortably. So here, Lama Tsongkhapa is pointing out to the confusion, the ignorance confusion that dominates our minds. He's pointing out to each of us explicitly, you are sitting here, relaxed, enjoying your life, enjoying the pleasures of the high realm rebirth. Relaxing as if freedom had been attained. Relaxing as if there were no possibility of such a rebirth for you. But this is just your confused ignorance. Rather, through hearing a presentation, understanding the causes that lead to such rebirths, what should arise within one is a fear, an apprehension of such a rebirth. And that then leads the one to be cautious in relation to our inner workings, what's going on in our mind, ensuring that we strive then to take care of our mind, to guard against coming under the influence of the afflictions. In other words, to be watchful over our own mind and thereby our physical and verbal activity. This is the purpose of this presentation. It's presented here by the Buddha and Lama Tsongkhapa to shake us from this confused ignorance and to recognize that we need to do two things. We need to guard our mind now to prevent the accumulation of new non-virtue, and at the same time, we need to confess and purify already accumulated non-virtue. Thereby, through relying on the skillful technique of the four opponent powers, we can do both. We can refrain from accumulating a non-virtue anew, as well as purify what has already been accumulated. So this determination, the strength of mind that makes our practice serious and strong, this comes from reflecting well on topics such as this, and doing so repeatedly, leading to a stable, focused mind, and thereby a practice that is transformational in its power.
Deda samla jibar jede sidi deda samla sidi dishinye dede nga sungu dunga di pa samta dene kebana deda dene ki nyaba saya ki lum dum deware jiza nyama mangpo sayo sibi dene ki samta jene anda dede ani nyaba domya yeje domya churum soya da nga sabi diba digi pa ane shaktum che ure sungurwa dana nyimbo dene deda samla jibar jade Deda samla sayadi, deji nga songo dunga dige sam, dene gyuchun yawa dige sam, an dene ki nga sashi pi dikwa bachi nyangzu gyul mangpo yorete, dene sam yodo, da diso mewa mazon de pe sasara nga dene kanga chegesa, dene de tawa hudu sempe samla danji jigwa siro, dele kine pe sasara sempe kanga chesara, dene dingi dunga dige suyo tusamare sempe samla danji, ane dumba tsurim soya da, nyechu dumba tsurim soya da, dikwa dige pa sha,
Lama Tsongkhapa continues, you should think about them and be afraid. Them referring to the non-virtue that we have accumulated. And here this requires us to be honest with ourselves, recognizing that there are times in this life when we have accumulated powerful non-virtue that is newly abiding on our continuum. And there is no way we can say with any basis that we have come into this life without a mind tainted by non-virtue from past lives. There's no way we can make such a claim about ourselves. And therefore, any confidence we have that such a fate could not befall us is ignorant in the extreme. So therefore, we should think about this, that as an ordinary person, I will have such imprints on my continuum. Therefore, I need to both take care, I need to guard my mind, and I need to purify past misdeeds.
Deda barnas u gyayu dileme bichiris. Jiza dangan deji nyawa siya de tispa bakse de ji jiora se de bakse de ne chebe se tarung shu jeba si sonwa. Ina da dangan ji de ne tarung bo dangan de ne ma xi jie pa ji de ne yunu wu ji ro wo ne da xi jie me ne ma le pa de liang sem yuwa da xie ge wa zhu jie ya ji pa zhuo ma de jie ji yor ba da. Jiza yor de ne ki du su ko ya yo ma le jie. Di be ne tarung ko ya yo ma le. Jiza Deda barna da tse de dang gyawa chima nga son se de para de lia u gya yu samle u pa dang su dang jik puri ma de yo mares u gyu dile la ba me se da zo shi se di ma zo di bo ma sha ba che du shi ka je de shi yo do shi sa ba na u de pa dang je chu tian ma do ba sha ba na de u che so ba dine chi ma do me res je san dine chi ba me zang zo ni ma di bo sa je ge di bo mong bo sa ba de di bo ma sha ba ne ma du shi ne u ji pa dang je chu tian ma de du shi dine chi na la di ma do yo ma dine ko lam sa ma ni al ma ji yong ko je sa ta ren bu yo ma le chi le ji sang zo ni wa ge de ji sa da u pa dang u gyu wa se ye gyu se de pa chi dang chu yi tian ma do na de ne ma shi du ko ba ji sa dine chi ma do yo ma u pa dang ta je che ba zo di ma do yo ma le chi dene ki yunung bo che lo dang da wa zhuo wen de da ni wa le se de ma zhuo wen da di pa la de ya ta bi jan da che yo ba dine de ya yo ma che sa u pa ta pa dang su tian ma dine ki che ro dine du chi ma de yo ma le che sa ni wa le ge ya le ya ta ren gui guo ya yo ma so.
Lama Tsongkhapa concludes here, for nothing other than your precarious breathing separates you from them. So this we should read again and again until it strikes us awake from our slumber. Because we still live with this confusion that we have plenty of time. And yes, I may have done some wrong in my life, but I will purify that later. I will have an opportunity before death comes. I will do it later. As if we were expecting some kind of signpost saying these are our final days or weeks. As if we could have any certainty that as death approaches, we would have the strength of mind to be able to purify with vigor. We may even think that between the ending of this life and the potential rebirth in the lower realms, but there'll be many other lifetimes and I can purify then. This is equally deluded. None of us knows when our death is coming. It can come at any time. None of us can say with any certainty whether tomorrow will be our final day or whether we'll even see tonight. And moreover, none of us can say with any certainty where our next rebirth will be, what our next body will be. This needs to be reflected on to give us a sense of urgency that now is the time to bring an end to non-virtue and to strive in purification. The source for what Lama Tsongkhapa has just presented is from Shantideva's entering the Bodhisattva way. Having created the karma for hell, how can you sit there comfortably? And then from letter to a friend, harm doers are separated from hell only by the time it takes for their breathing to stop. Those who hear about the boundless torment of hell are not terrified in 1,000 ways, are hard like vajrans. Look in the first two lines. harm doers are separated from hell only by the time it takes for their breathing to stop. So this too is the source what Lama Tsongkhapa presented above. So when death comes, should rebirth be in hell, it is immediate. There isn't a period in between when it immediately, spontaneously takes rebirth there. So those of us who have these causes for such a rebirth on a continuum, we should be aware that such a rebirth could come at any time. Therefore, there should be a sense of urgency for our transformation.
Desolia Yawe Dunga Tinitine Yora, Dusutine Yora said, Shaye said, Jangas, Shawas and Janga that said in the Shores, Deniki Mongo Shene, Deniki Nesuti, Tene, Mongo in the Turge, Tugorde, the new and Deniki Namdo said, Number Mambu, Serge, don't hala sobala. Deniki Dunga, Pauto Meba, Namda Mango, she didn't say, Gunning, but in the Shores said, Bechi said that the nigger number of Mongbuching as a 2 hours, 10 the new 10 the new she Adelia, Shena, or dead in the best arguments in Bedelia, Shena, Tardugi, Samba Majivachi, Majiva in the Denigi Shena Maji, Dele Tarduga, Samba Majivana, the nigger Indi, Dorjina, and Chaku Shu, Greg in the meeting, she read was as it's somewhat that.
Those who hear about the boundless torments of hell and are not terrified. So this refers to, we've just very, very briefly gone through this presentation. But even from a brief presentation like this, if one hears about that the suffering that is being experienced there may well again have to be experienced by ourselves. For such a person who hears a presentation like this, and it doesn't strike them in their heart, then they approach this more as if it was a story or something relevant to others. Then they are here likened to being hard like a vajra, that this can, not even a presentation like this can touch them.
Dipong Kiru Che, the Masamba, Pere, Hangsayarus, some Denigi Ning, Chapo, Denis, Guatama to the Peretas, the Nix, the Digoma is more than that.
If one's here's a presentation such as this, and it doesn't shake you to the core, but it just washes off you as if it is just something like a story or not relevant to you, just to others, then that you really are in grave danger.
Adinma, this were Nyawan Jiba, Tongdang, Tuebadang, Jana, Ladang, Susu Yinam Jiang, Jiba Jewer Guna, Mississippi, Nemin Yamson Yona, which is Salashi Sonso was.
Still from Letter to a Friend. If seeing, hearing, remembering, and reading descriptions of hell and their depictions gives rise to fear, then there is no question about the experience of the unbearable, fully ripened effects.
Nyevi kori diniki ma songche dini yore se pa nyevi ki ta nga zi sheba diji sheba na nyewa tsanye tiye tanye dine kanga dini yore se tue ba tang. Di tenpa se di ten si do diniki tue tonga tue ne di duanji zhu lo la ya xia la si kore xia wa tang. Dine lao ba tang se di yang chi pechi shung ma lamri chi mo lo ba na si diniki ta nyevi kori ma du shi songche pe shung pechi tiki lao ba ina lao ba tang. Ne susu ki nam se de da bene da ji mo bene xiana chu da de ni ge ji ge nyewi ge da su ma xia da nyawo nye su ba xia da nyewi ge da ji gang ha je mo bu mo ji xia su de ni ge ba la so ba de dong qian zao ji xiana zi ji xia ge ba de ni tong yo de tong nam ge ji ba ge wo ju na ma zu xie ge du was 데네기 빈 니와 고 줌퇴하다 리모 디셔버 통야다 데네 통야데 심리 어다 시에나다 심리에 마기버 흥도 와스 징안저 바로비 통야다 줌로 퇴바 점기 데네기 마기버다 시에나 연구여바네 뭐서 메니 깨바네 가능성 연구래 강아 둥아 시에나다 둥아 가서 연구래 뭐서 깨바 델레다 다시 호지 연구라도 바다 리모다 데네기 니서를 줌로 퇴바 점기 안들에 심리 마기버다 시에나 기버원다 베니냐와 뭐서 깨는 둥아 연구다 가능성 둥아 연구 말 강아 연구 말했지 호지 연구로 와서 그러다 내민 제 집을 기교나 네 미세베기 내민 냠소 녀나 무시사스 미세베서 냐와로 무슨 말 기제 동아데네 빠토메바 강아데 용용도 가네스 시화요 말 강아시나 강아요데 시화요 말해서 그러다.
The second verse then refers to those who we started in the order if seeing, so those who see depictions of hell. So perhaps these will be murals or tankas, or hearing. So hearing teachings such as this, remembering, so reflecting, engaging in the meditations as described, as well as reading texts which are giving descriptions of hell and their depictions. So again, referring to illustrations. Those who engage in this process as guided will give rise to fear. They will give rise to fear. And if merely hearing about how others are suffering and what the suffering that may well befall oneself, if that leads to fear, then we can appreciate just what it would be like to be born there. And this is important, to come to such a conclusion, because that will lead one to seek out the causes and ensure they do not impact one. Refrains and purifies.
그래서 데니기 아주게 땀 튀어봐다 리모트 봐 통야다 데네 땀 튀어봐다 데니기 안데 통야도 시나기 시나다 암라기거든 매니 무수 깨바는데 동아 빠도 매번 용어가 강아 예버려 왔어 데네사 나아줄에 다데 탑람들 가려서 데네 무수 마게기 고갑디 탑람제 등 아줄에 탑라 예여버려 데네사 디본 기록체에 베즈치 냠내 지어데 빼면서기 침몰해서 뭐도 아니고.
And this then, if fear does arise from hearing descriptions like this, if one does relate to the teachings in the way that intended, which is as personal instruction, then it will lead one to reflect deeply on the causes that will lead to such potential rebirths, and to refrain and purify so as to utilize this opportunity, whatever remains, to close the door to falling into such a lower realm.
시에서야 동알 잡고야 시팅레스 가르송레스네 데도군예 나나 세세바 데베다고 기바 지다버 디신 동어군예 나네니 날메 녜외 동알 랍미세 디나 인지 동통 숨게이 랍도 작답 동아 강라바 데네 녜외 동아 충우랑 월야 미기 차야 미표에도 시송소스 시소스 시송소스네 시소 니지베 월야 미기 차야 미표에도 시소스 디바도 어디와
The intense suffering is also described in Letter to a Friend. So Lama Tsongkhapa quotes the next two verses. Just as the bliss of the extinction of craving is supreme among all kinds of bliss, likewise, among all kinds of suffering, those of avicii are the most unbearable. The suffering of being brutally stabbed in one day by 300 spears does not approximate and cannot compare to even the smallest suffering of hell.
대상단위와 기반의 동안 잡고 간수열에서는 시진 나라도 송래지래. 대화군에 나나 세세바 대외 다고 기와 지다와서. 언디니게스데 당하주기 대외 나네 대화 초도 규바디 대화군에 나나 세세바 세지 대화 초도 규바에 가래서는 당하주기 녀모바 빵배 빵바 tarba tobaina seba jo koale to tarba koa kichi yun yomoba seba di pa pangbaina dene dewe dabo kiwa jidawa dewe dabo res dewa chodo yuba res orda dewa kunji nana seba koale kiwa ji yomoba se pangbaina yomoba seba sen dösha sorda dösha la sopa dinane jiza yomoba koale ki yun yomoba di pangbaina yomoba sabona jeba pangbaina 근데 대화 대띵이 대화니 띵이 대화 토레스 지자 대외 다고 기바 제 대화 다고 여자라 소소게 다고 있는 소소 강 비지다나 기디나 소소 요요 봐 다고 많이 미자 야샤반은 임시 되 비지다 파티오 봐 디나지 지자 다고 세도 잘라도 소 다고 있는 기디나 소소로 왕제 갈 비지다나 소소 요요 봐 지자 다 누가 요모 봐 사보나 제바 차상 빵바 있는 빵비 타르비고 봐 토바 있나 얘네 대외 다고 샤들 대화 다고 나지 다고 나래시 지자데 니 대외 기디나다 대외 쪼어디 톱사래 지자 띵이 대화 니네 대화는 대화면 동아견이 용하여 말어 와서
Just as the bliss of the extinction of craving is supreme amongst all kinds of bliss or happiness. The extinction of craving, this comes when the afflictions together with their seeds have been abandoned. Then one achieves lasting, stable happiness. And this lasting, stable happiness is supreme amongst all kinds of happiness because it is lasting. One will never once again experience any form of suffering, pain, or misery. This is what's achieved when the causes of suffering are eradicated. That's all.
지상아주 지단 대화들에 양아주 밀리게데 헤이 대화 미 대화 아주 밀리게데 양아주 디기뇨아쇼레 할레게나 디기뇨아쇼레 디기요르데 이나야 지금 대화 양지 띵이 대화 차요 말고 그래서 갑래 대화 갑래 야 규제 동아 강아체 책으로 봐 지단 디네자 띵이 대화 토요 말 지단 콜위 뇨모바 사보나 제바 차상 빵바이나 세바 콜왈리기 유뇨모바데 차상 빵바이네 디네 띵이 대화 톱사래 된 대외 다고 차사래스 대지가 라다 미용어도 고바 토바네 대화 시험에 대외 다고 차야 말고 테스트 대화냐 동아기 연구로 와 디나지로 다고 나시 말레스 제삼 타바 토바네 대외 다고 차사 대화다 된 대화는 대화마도 띵이 동아야叫저기 매바라 와서 지자 되네 자 대지 셰디 가르쳐 준 것은 대지가 지금 나선교 나 윤예외 동아디기 파 디니게 삼다 되네 디니 위디게 살레러보리 지자 디네자 니마 사샤바 요레 지자 디니긴자 두 삼다지 소수기 님보띠 아니 지게 수rim송 될야 님보띠 다음에 포토베시 님보띠 고음제 두시네 수rim송에 니 사바뉴모바 가서 디바 사바 사마주바 수rim송 소외가 디네 닝알 사샤바디게 여바 녀모바 디게 여바디게 님보띠 다음에 포토베시로 고음제 두스 빵바이나 녀모데 빵바이나 디네 띵이 대화 톱사레스 지산 디네 대화는 대화 디에 다보 차사레 디원 대화 차사 모두 디 동아균이야요 말레스 지산 디네자 대시 강아 디네 동아디게 삼다 델레게 타르게 삼바기 디네게 되네 디 타리게 된다라는 저기 수림송 녀모바 지바에 디바마게도 수림송야다 수림송에 되네 당한서 가르쳐 왔으네 진바다 저바다 준리 냠네제 다음에 버도 외시라 냠네지 곰치네 아니 띵이진 죽시네 곰 되네 다음에 버도 외시라 곰발에 되네 녀모바 사바나 제바 방고 그래서 이 방송에나 띵이 되어와래 그래서 니베 다보래 차례에서
The word translated is bliss. It's a normal translation, but I'll rather stay with happiness because it fits the explanation better. So there are many types of happiness, and we long for happiness, we strive for happiness, but we have never experienced supreme happiness. No human being, no ordinary human being, no God has ever experienced supreme happiness. So therefore, the happiness that we yearn for, the happiness that others brag about, this is nothing compared to what is being described here, supreme amongst all kinds of happiness. This is the happiness that comes through attaining liberation. So the position we find ourselves in now is that as an ordinary person, we can recognize how easy it is for us still to accumulate the causes for suffering. And we can thereby also, by looking back over this life, and can understand in previous lives too, we have accumulated an immense store of non-virtue. So because it's so easy to accumulate non-virtue, and that it is actually quite difficult for us to achieve a dominance of happiness, we recognize there's a need to bring about some urgent change, to embrace this opportunity, to utilize this opportunity that this life presents, to utilize it fully. All that is required is, with consistency, to apply the training that we are each receiving. To apply this training, thereby we will be able to radically transform our situation. What is required is just this: refraining from the afflictions and purifying past non-virtue. And this is done through accumulating ever stronger, wholesome minds, virtuous minds. In particular, cultivating the foundation of ethical restraint, and then embellishing that virtue, that is ethical restraint, with its companion accumulations, in particular with the wisdom realizing emptiness. This is the technique by which each of us can and will eventually achieve supreme happiness. This happiness that amongst all kinds is supreme. So we need to establish a determination to close the door to potential rebirth in the lower realms and to achieve the supreme state of happiness through cultivating the causes of generosity, ethical restraint, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, concentration, and with concentration, engage in the cultivation of the wisdom realizing emptiness. This is the path, and it's possible for all of us.
Dine, da dunga nane, deshin dunga kunye nane, narme nyewe dunga rabme ses. So that jisan dunga nale anze mile dunga yongore, hala dunga anze tenrul kewene, dunga nyoa yodora, dunga yodibare. Andi mase, da jig dunga lada mile tenrul kewene, dunga yore, di mase, ane anze nyawal kewene, da nyawa jige nyaham chopye samtangda dunga jamara yoyobare. Di nane, jisan dine deshin sedu anzo ki dewe nane dewa chodo gyuba de tarbe gopang topne dewa chodo gyuba toguduwas gyuwa tingi dewa toguduwa. Di nane dunga nane dunga mangbu yore nane deshin dunga kunye nane dunga mi dewa da mi dunga da le dunga tenjuge dunga ande maze an dunjuge dunga idage dunga nyewe dunga sime duse di nane ba zibe na nyawa narmebi dunga di mises da dunga nane dunga chisho de nyawa narmegi dunga de yesu deshe dunga kunye nane narme nyewe dunga ramesese nyawa ki nyaham choge di nane ma da dunga nane dunga chisho de nyawa narmegi dunga de yesu.
Nagarjuna continues, likewise amongst all kinds of sufferings, the sufferings that we are so familiar with from this life, the sufferings of humans, as well as the sufferings of the gods, the sufferings of beings bound in the lower realms, of animals, of spirits, and the various classes of beings suffering in the hells, those suffering in the hot hells, those suffering in the neighboring hells, those suffering in the cold hells, those suffering in the occasional hells. Amongst all of these various forms of suffering that characterize samsaric existence, those of Avicii are the most unbearable.
Dina niji dungtung jayi rabdur jata dunga kanglaba dini nyewe dunga chungula waljan miji chaya mibido sayadi da dona la nganzo mili ya luidin denduki tena sebena pene nimi rere ya dung la tongnu deniki sum dungtung ja sumja pene sumja ki jikpa ma zune rabdu jikshuk chenpo tena ma zu tabne tabne rabdu jak tab side den ma to supolo zune du ane dunga patme ba yungura dunga kala pa dunga patme ba yungura ba jiza deniki nimi rere ya sar sumjas 되게 조제대 배축 첨보다 되는 시에도 나스다 동화 같이 되어와 지단이 요르데 디 동화디 아주기 딘 동화디 예외 동화 집에나 예외 동화 중앙랑스 예외 동화 나는 예외 동화 충쇼디 녀아들의 딜레랑 지게 예외 동화 충쇼디 딜레 답유기다 배치 계좌 구주 하게 동화 체가 돼서 지상 안쪽에 미세체 아주 대비 된주에 때래 아주 류리아 되는 동 지게 충충 숨제 되는 게 지금 이래 차로 숨게 되는 바 조제 잡고 되니까 주변에 동화 봐도 매번 용어를 디 동화다 예외 동화 충쇼니 제베는 예외 동화 충쇼디 배직 될야 월년 찰미비에서 배코 군이 들어봐나 둘투야 하는 말이지 지단 예외 동화 충쇼디야 시호제 계좌 구주고 오고라서 베게 계좌 가서를 동화 채와래서 월년 찰미비에서
The final verse from Letter to a Friend. The suffering of being brutally stabbed in one day by 300 spears. So this is something that, of course, can and has happened many times in our human realm. And what it's pointing to is an analogy of something that we could understand as a human being as being an intense suffering experience. So whatever intense suffering experience as a human being one has experienced or can imagine, and the verse continues, does not approximate and cannot compare to even the smallest suffering of hell. So what we strive to avert and we worry about and we plan to overcome, this is nothing compared to even the slightest of sufferings that potentially await us. So this is important to recognize, to gain some valid perspective.
다 대답이 동안 기위 균이 랑기 예주 코나 이발 셰브라 제라 네 예주 충호야 먹어봐 네 가서 잘 지위기 베데스 안디니레스 배우레스 나도신 베데스.
The Lama Tsongkhapa continues, you need to understand that the cause giving rise to such suffering is your own faulty behavior alone. Strive with all your might not to be tainted by even the slightest faulty action.
제사다 되는 동아지 유딩아 주게 류마유 스쿨롱게 샬라 체위 뉴스치비게 삼로 군롱 되고 군롱 디왕게 안데 지가 줄이야 류마게 녀바 제디 디바사요도 난 디바사 디비디 왕게 다는 거 기고래 제로와 대대비 동아지 유디 아주 예주 코나레마도 셴 아주 디바마사나 디데보 지 요하요 말레스 코나레스 제사 되니자 예주 총원 예바 총준 나다디디 총준을 가요 말씀에 삼마다지 예보 총준이네 전부이네 전부대 비임바 마세 총준지네야 예 총유자 마고 바데 在지역이야 셈이 리버팅 배지 배제 제제 도시네 바 수름도 송고래 예주 송고래 해서래.
The Lama Tsongkhapa is saying in the first sentence, you need to understand that the cause giving rise to such suffering is your own faulty behavior alone. So this points very clearly to our afflicted motivation. When our motivation is, our mind is dominated by the afflictions and behavior follows, this is how we create the causes of suffering. That is the only reason why we suffer. So to point a finger of blame to others, this is completely deluded. So we recognize that we are the cause of our own suffering. And by recognizing this is empowering. It means by refraining from such causes, we can bring about a radical change to what we experience. And this point is made further in the second sentence. Strive with all your might not to be tainted by even the slightest faulty action. So be determined. Do not allow yourself to be deceived by the afflictions that says, this doesn't matter. This is minor. Compared to other things, this is no problem. This is how we end up engaging in grave non-virtue. So refrain even from minor infractions.
And the Niles, that is, shitting less, right? The Niles, Migi, Jenam, 그래서 미기에 제디 남기 사번니 류가 이 예주 휴기니 지내 데들 지내 데들 좀야 마치바 데들은 니기에 자기 배버주 제송소스.
Lama Tsongkhapa once again quotes from letter to a friend. The seeds of these non-virtuous effects are your faulty behavior, body, speech, and mind. With all your skill, make every effort not to commit even the slightest negative deed.
나든다듯이 소마 셰바는 지과를 가르스네 미기의 제비 니남 사번니 류가 이기 예주에서데 제사당하는 중에 냐와 드니기 동아 용외의 제보 동아디에 차상 유 사번나 유이디 가서 류가기 예주디게 디바데레스 예주이 세티스모레 류가 미기의 제이디디 남게 사번니 류가 이기 예주에서.
Clearly, this verse then is the source for what Lama Tsongkhapa has just said. So the seeds of those non-virtuous effects are your faulty behavior of body, speech, and mind. Every suffering experience that we ever have and ever will encounter is due to our own faulty behavior.
제사다 규기세 시rin이 공부를 이렇게 나 개벌을 송하잖아요. 이제 개벌 결혼 계세요. 규기 진에 대둘자면 마치바 세들 결혼기에다 임진 민지 애바도 되니기 디버 충고자면 마치바제 둘자면 마치바 년마게 이 사샤바이네 디버디 파차상도 자야다 또 시험을 지내야 배주의 제제 단내 탑시 간데 시험이나 탑시 제제 당진 되는 지내야 임진 민지서 지내 둘자면 마치바 세들 녀바세데 되니기 녀주기 디버 싸우기는 사교 충충지야 사교 말레스 네 대다른 이게 세기 배바서서 되니기 배주 소야다 아니 예마 사시비 디바는 배주의 제제인지 메제 배주 니버된지 자리에서 니버된지 안 배주신 샤군적으로 해서 하나님부터 송하다.
The third line references with all your skill. So it's who the person being addressed is the friend to whom the letter Nagarjuna composed and sent this letter, which was a king in ancient India. So with all your skill, you, O king. But it, of course, we take it in reference to ourselves, that we therefore must make every effort not to commit even the slightest negative deed. So here, Nagarjuna is writing in a very strong sense. It would be with an imperative, maybe an exclamation mark, that we need to both purify and refrain from non-virtue.
나도 나랑은 저게 가르친 제월에서네 다디니기 디네냐위 동아 디네 산이 야와 야함 접기기 동아 디네 요래 세제 디네 요래 세데 하고요도 당어서 어다 디니기 소소한 섬다 나랑 저게 섬다 다디 디네니서 하고 어디 빼 야구 중소 섬에들 와다 야구 중소에 하 먹어는 디 유가는 수용보다 하 먹어 내려야 타려게 탑람기네 섬다 두고 말아 디네서 저게 다 디니기 예금 접기기 디니 동아디기 되는 댕기 용어 받아 차사디서 하고 빼하고 중소하다 되네서 델이야 이제 걔네들 빼사야래 시자다 동아녀에 녀제가 동아여여 받아 지자다 다들 알아서야 델 지마키에게 탑름 제도 고 주여버려 지자딘 마 제름 좀 소마나시 당하는 주게 예초되면 수름 소야다 아니 알아서 봐지 님베 뜻이거든 샤야디 근데 우스전에 샤다 두고 그래 되네서 당이 비수 제제 또 시기인 선배가 당하는 주게 되니기 네수 신바데 빼하고 다 되니기 신여도 네들에 타야게 탑람디야 하고 소선 되니 빼하고 중소 선배게다 두 삼다에 돈에 당하는 주게 다 돈다 삼다에디 누가 있으면 그냥 이샬레 너베 자와 싸우기는 지금 매 선배게 당 수름선 삼로디 야네야도 고미야 지키로하다 되니 곰네 다디 돈에 아 주게 녀마 사시비 디바디기네 다디 디리 직팀에도 너를 제베 다 배사리 진상에 디리 근데 지게 친진의 마음번 싸우기는 지금에 지난데 디링이 되니게 녀마 사시비 디바디기네 양이 유 겸력 건조스미 되는데야 디링 샤긴 섬제 뭐바체 샤긴 섬비게 되니게 삼로 도시네 계제 아니 디장한 적이다 미치게 소소기다 Geshe Thubten Rabten Geshe 사바이네 당한도 차세워있는 최고 부여에는 두시는 삼단계 개화사야 되고 지자 디본게 룹자데 디바본야데 개화루야데 근데 지기때네 안두시 동에 셈바자야 근데 지게 쇠바고 쇠베 냠는지야 and the Junju Samya, and Jing Molam Tayala Soba, then the Susugita, Nubala Babi, Denike, Dinges, Shinia Comiala Soba, then a Dami because some dialogue soba, or the Jamini or some Dama, do so got Chevina, like Yavasago, that you need on him. Some Dama did that. Dibon Kirupshe said, Yamin, Dicheva, Yumsendi, the Esada, Chizandini Chevaina, Sosudu, Much Cheven, Chizankiwa Chimanga, son to Skill Mari, Yawa, Yawamajan, Nivitunati, Young Mari Essage, Chizandinigi, Tushin, or Essed, the Dilling answer, she had it in the share.
Now, having concluded looking at the hell realms, where we've looked very briefly at the 8 hot hells, the 8 cold hells, as well as the presentation briefly on the neighboring and occasional hells. We've gained some knowledge about the experience that a huge number of beings are having to endure, an experience that we would have had in lives past and may well have in lives future. So as uncomfortable as it may well have been to hear this, having this knowledge, though, is empowering. Being ignorant of this reality, this does not serve anyone. But having this knowledge, and thereby knowing there is something I can do about this, we then can actually utilize this precious opportunity that we each have attained, utilize it skillfully, utilize it well. So prompted by this knowledge, we can then search for the best course of action. And as we've heard, this means to accumulate and purify. But if we really take to heart this presentation, our regular or daily practices of accumulation and purification, we will bring a sustained strength and vigor to our practices, a seriousness to our practices, where if we find that our practice sometimes is a bit of a recitation, going through the motions, by calling to mind the reality that is presented here, this we can use to stir our mind, to bring about a deep inner seriousness and persistence to our practice. So the 4 opponent powers are what we need to rely on. And within the overall context of the 4 opponent powers, one can make great effort, perhaps, in that of the antidotal power. By this, what I mean is, you engage in various virtuous activities. If you make that the antidotal power by conjoining it with the other 3 opponent powers, in this way, when you engage in meditation on a topic, whether it's love, whether it's generosity, whether it's ethics, whether it's concentration or wisdom, whatever it may be, but if you do that then in the context of the other 3 opponent powers, you'll be purifying. Likewise, when you do offerings or you do some mantra recitation, if you do so as the antidotal power, one just conjoins it with the other 3, confession and the basis and restraint, then one will both engage in extensive accumulation and purification. If you do so, particularly that of the opponent power of regret, through reminding yourself of what you've heard here, this will bring about a seriousness and a persistence to your practice. And in this way, one will start to leave behind harmful and negative ways of thinking and helpful, wholesome ways of thinking. They will become much more normal, more common within. Thank you. We'll conclude there for tonight. Thank you.